Hey guys and girls, Bored Now back with you. On this video I will be talking about Stranger Things for chapters 5 and 6. So chapter 5 is called the Nina Project and chapter 6 is called The Dive. Full spoilers from the start of this review as always. Sorry there's been a bit of delay between Stranger Things reviews, but two really good episodes once again, really solid stuff, building the story for the season nicely. So I'll talk about the Nina Project first of all, obviously, and it balances a lot. There's a lot going on in the episode, but it does it really well. Another thing I'll say is I think this might be the most entertaining episode of the season so far, because I remember back with the first episode this season saying how I actually didn't find it that funny, which is unusual for Stranger Things, but it seems as though as we've got more into the groove with the gang and stuff and the banter back and forth and different things, then the humour has sort of returned. But this is a very funny episode and a really standout episode for certain characters and certain lines, but once again things bubbling up very nicely with the plot. The Mike and the L side of things, their two groups make some sort of big strides this one. So I'll start off with the L stuff, which is the most heavy stuff of the episode. Maybe if I have a small complaint, it maybe just feels that stuff is a little bit out of sorts with the other stuff. I guess it just feels very different to that stuff, but obviously I realise it's very important moving forward. So Owens takes her to this underground base in Nevada, and it turns out that they're still running the operations from there. They're still running the operation with the children with special powers. And they're obviously doing it now on their own time in a private facility, so they're doing it without the government's knowledge. They've continued on the work as they see it, which one of the interesting things about this storyline is this idea of them, like Owens in particular, going rogue and doing things under the radar. And as I said in another review, it's almost like he has more motivation to do it because of being shoved to the side and fired by the government, and because he obviously does have a sense of morality when it comes to these things, and that's something we see again in this episode. But I do like his line when they come in and Al looks at him. He's like, "Did you really think we've ran it out of a shed?" Which is a good line, but you have this great reveal pre-credits, the last shot, because Elle starts panicking and you start to see these footsteps coming down these stairs, and it turns out it's Branner. It's confirmed in this episode Branner is still very much alive, unless he's just appearing to Elle, but it certainly seems like he's still alive, and he's running this operation again, and he, I guess, is the perfect guy to help Al discover why she lost her powers and to help her get them back. And there's sort of a mini arc this episode where Al has to learn to trust him again, because she's very unsettled, very shocked to see him. And they do this whole thing where it's they put her in the tank, and she goes under, and she has to do a series of challenges and tests, and obviously she sees the other kids in this facility who aren't the most likable, where they do gang up on her at some point. There's also another character who's an Audrey who sort of befriends her and kind of says he's there for her, he understands her and stuff, and starts just feeding her little bits of truth. So there's a question mark next to him whether he's someone Elle can trust or not. Almost that Twilight Zone style feel, this sort of loop and these challenges where she has to figure out the right way, but it's done on repetition. So They are well done. I can't really complain too much about how they're done. You know, you get certain things where she has to tap into certain memories. She has to like remember certain things and important events from her life. Like for example, when her mother came to visit, but character says is then your mother's still alive. Elle, she knew her mother was like dead. She's into her emotions, so if she has like a particular like breakdown or like an emotional memory, then it can sort of trigger them. And it's revealed, and the episode is called the Nina Project because that's the name of the machine that they're using in this facility to carry out these tests. So that's a good sort of like link. And one sort of twist I sort of like is then they're talking about important powers and weapons in this season, almost like you can say nuclear powers type thing that we got a bit of last season. And it's almost like Elle is like the nuclear power, the special weapon they're protecting in like this sort of bomb shelter type place. And yeah, the machine is named after this famous opera singer who was called Nina, and that actually is one of the early tests for Elle with Branner. Like she has to figure out like the background of that and the answer to that riddle. So that's pretty good stuff. I like the idea of it being named Nina. It's almost like a very Russian name as well, which is maybe perfect for what they're going for. Are we meant to like Branner now? Like, does this sort of throw away the stuff at the start of the season where he at least, you know, that opening 8 minutes, he was at least presented in a more likeable sort of light, and that he does maybe care for like these children on some level. Owens put it to Elle in a previous episode. He says there's a war coming up and we need you for the war, and obviously you can understand why someone with her sort of abilities and powers would be called upon. By the end of the episode, she's like trying to escape the facility, and like Papa or Branner is like there, and he says he won't stop her if she wants to leave, but he does, you know, reinforce this idea of her and her memories being like important, and that's why she needs to stay, because he can't possibly help her otherwise, and this is important for her as well as like for the mission. So I'll switch over to the Mike group now, because they actually have a pretty big episode which connects nicely to the Elle plot in Nevada. So they start off escaping the police, obviously, or the government, that frantic like type shootout at the end, and obviously Argyle in the pizza brand driving them away, all this frantic stuff, which was really entertaining stuff. But they've also got the cop in the back now who's got wounded. He's helped them escape, but he got wounded in the process. And pretty graphic scene as well, pretty tense. So they're trying to get him to a safe place, trying to treat him, and also trying to communicate with him because they want to find out maybe where Elle is, because he obviously knows, and because it's so frantic, like he doesn't really get it across to them, but he keeps saying something about Nina, which we know is to do with the Nina Project, and he's giving them little clues, because I guess he's just so out of it, it's hard to like actually tell them the whole thing. But this is a good example of like the mystery stuff working well in this plot. So later on he does die, and they bury him, and it's quite sad really, because they like just have to bury him in this spot out in the desert because yeah, it's the way it has to be. Argyle, who I said wasn't as bad last episode, he is quite annoying again in this episode, but at the very least I do like the way they use him, because what happens is he's in this sort of like funny moment, he's like using like the pizza box as like a gravestone for like this dead cop, which is funny. I did like that, and Jonathan's like, come on man, we're burying him here because he can't be found, and you're like giving him like a gravestone, but he's in the end he just gives in. It's like, whatever, do it. But it's what's clever is it's something that tweaks Mike, because him and Will are talking, and he remembers then the cop was talking about something to do with like a pizza box and a number or something. So they take the pizza box away from Argyle, and Mike sees that there's a number on it, and it's a number for them to like phone. So later on they try phoning because they assume it's like to do with this Nina project. And they try phoning and they can't get through. They just get like a high-pitched sound. So they work out that it's not the sort of number you phone. It's like a code type thing. You have to like patch it through like on a fax or on a computer or something like that. So they decide that they need someone with like hackers like qualifications. And I guess if you're paying attention to like Stranger Things, you may know where they're going. But this is a really great moment for Will, because him and Mike both they both figure it out, and it's something to do with like we only know like one hacker, and it's like they're in like whatever state it was. I think it was Rhode Island or something like that. And Will starts singing the song, which is, of course, The Never Ending Story, which is just a great moment. It's so perfect. And then he sings it rather than just saying, yeah, we need Susie. Because I like Jonathan's reaction as well. Jonathan is pretty decent in this episode, that like his reactions to things, because he's immediately... It's almost like he's doing the Big Brother thing of, oh, come on, you don't really want us to do that, do you? This is crazy. And they're like, it's the only way. So by the end of the episode, they're off to see Susie. It's like this really massive family, and they all seem to be like, or the children at least, not so much the dad, but the children, they're all into like performing arts, and they're doing like this whole like routine with like one of them's like dressed as like a cowboy, I think it was, and playing dead, the whole thing. They have to get past like them and get into Susie. Enjoy that stuff at this episode, and I like them. They were figuring things out and getting close to like the Nevada and where like the Nina project was. As good as some of that stuff was, once again, the highlight really came from the Max, Dustin, Accenture group, and like the Victor, Crowley, Demon, Vecna side of the plot. There's some good stuff with Eddie in this episode too. I'll talk about that in a moment. But this is where Stranger Things and this season really goes all Scooby-Doo. We continue with the fallout from what happened in the dramatic episode 4. They're now in like Nancy's house, and we see them with obviously the parents, and we're sort of reminded what a douche, but quite an entertaining grouchy douche like Ted is, because this is he's getting all uptight about them spending time there and like eating them out of house and home, and Karen's like the opposite. Obviously she's just very nurturing and takes them in and is happy to do it. Ted is being like the grouch of the couple once again, and he's being sarcastic. It's like, oh sure, yeah, just help yourself, Dustin. And Dustin's like, thank you, I will. And he grabs like a stack of pancakes, which is really good. But all this stuff and the way it grows organically in this episode is like really satisfying. Again, one thing I like is I like how supportive Nancy is with Max, following what she's been through, how she like encourages her, and it's just very like subtle and gentle with her. Because what happens is Max draws a picture of what happened when she was like in the dream world and her memories and her dreams, and she draws a picture of the house, of Victor's house, which is just perfect. So naturally leads them off on another investigation where they decide they must go to Victor's house to try and get answers, because it appeared to her in the dream, so they figure it must be important. And they go off as a group, and everything they do in this house is just brilliant. I just love the whole, like, as I said, Scooby-Doo type vibes, and the way they play off each other, and they just have a nice sort of close-knit circle here where everybody like adds something. Robin has some standout lines once again, because the place is boarded up. Apparently it hasn't been like open for years, and that might be the line of the episode from Robin, because she says at one point, I guess like triple homicide isn't the best for like retail, like resale or something like that, which is a really good line. But also she has a good moment where they're saying, how are we going to get in? And she just like smashes the windows. She's like, I've got a key, and smashes the window. It's almost like the Giles type moment in Buffy, you know, when he uses the chainsaw to get in that house. So good, but just so direct and to the point, which is great. And as I said, when they get in the house and they start looking around this dusty old house, all the lights are down, and it's really like creaky and eerie looking, very like old fashioned. We've obviously seen it before, but in some of the flashbacks it was set during day, so it looked a bit more sort of pretty. But as I said, this really has a very eerie, like old house type feel to it. And then just walking around in flashlights, you get some good banter with Dustin and Steve. Like, because Steve, at one point, they're talking about the clock and the importance of the clock, and they obviously see like a clock in the house, I think, and Steve's just speculating. He says something, well, was Victor like a clockmaker? And Dustin's like, my God, Steve, I think you've cracked the case. This is also like the episode. Some of you would have seen the trailer and the clip of like Dustin doing like the Sherlock Holmes impersonation, the Sherlock Holmes lines to Steve, and Steve, of course, being a bit out of the loop on these things, doesn't know what he's talking about, what he's referencing, and Dustin's like, you never heard of Sherlock Holmes? But it just feels like such a Dustin type moment. Then he would go to like the extreme of actually doing a voice and like an impression. That just feels so perfect for Dustin. So they continue looking around this house. Like, I think it's Nancy who takes charge. It's a good like character thing for her, and she becomes the leader almost, and she splits them into groups, and Steve and Dustin are together, like, because of course they are. And Dustin's like, what's that face you gave me, that sound, the tone? It's like, there's no tone. And Dustin's like, yeah, there was. What was that about? And Steve's like, it's no big deal, but I always get put with you. So there's this whole like married couple vibe between them, where Steve is like reacting because he's always with Dustin. So everything between them in this episode is so great. I'm glad that we've gotten back into like the whole bromance thing. There's also a really nice smaller moment with Lucas and with Max where they reconnect some more, and he tells a joke, he makes a laugh, and he just says, I miss that. She's like, what? I miss making you laugh. And it's a really nice moment between them. And once again, Lucas is very sweet in that scene, very, very like protective of her, says, you don't have to shut me out, you can tell me anything, I'm here for you, I'll do whatever needs to be done. It's such a nice scene, sort of a good little scene. But as they go through this house, obviously weird shit starts to go down, things start to escalate, and obviously the demon or the spirit is like reacting to them being there. So at one point, like, there's like this glass with like spiders in that comes out of nowhere, goes after Steve. We've obviously seen this before, and there is like another moment, another Steve and Nancy moment, another Stancy moment, as the ship is called, where she actually starts like being protective of him and actually helps him get the spiders off and make sure he's okay. And there's definitely that sort of moment between them, maybe more from her, but Robin again is like giving her sort of a look, and it's like, I see where this is leading. And they have like another sort of conversation where like she's almost doing what Dustin type does, where she's just dropping all these hints and, you know, what's the deal, Nancy? Like you're into Steve. I can confirm that I'm no threat. There's nothing between me and Steve. Which is another interesting thing, because of course Robin still hasn't come out to anyone but Steve. So that's important. They've continued that and they've respected that. Then, especially in the 80s, this would be very tough for like Robin to come out to other people. So it does make sense, and she still hasn't told anyone else, which is part of the drama, because obviously without Dustin knowing this and without Nancy knowing this, they obviously wouldn't then dismiss the possibility of a thing with Steve and Robin, because they get on very well and do seem to have chemistry and are close. But that's something which they've handled very well also, because in like a lesser type show, I think they would sort of just drop that, or they would just take it as read than everyone knows now, because Robin has come out. But yeah, we do get some more stancy hints in this. So another thing is we get the Kate Bush song once again, because they're going to use that for all it's worth. But that becomes important because they decide then it could sort of draw them out. It could like lead them to wherever Vecna is. So Max like uses that. They're also using torches, which they figure out is important. Like it should guide them. And I really like the visual of the torches and them being, they get further up this house, further like up the stairs into another room. So that's really good stuff visually as well, and it feels very like atmospheric. But by the end of the episode, they figure out that he's in the Upside Down. That's where he is. That they're drawn to like this particular spot, and it's revealed that then he is in the Upside Down. So that's obviously a big reveal, and that's where they're heading. But it's like a certain spot in the Upside Down. They find out that it's actually in a spot in Lover's Lane, because we've sort of discovered this season then there's connections between the killing spots, these murders around town. So it's not just the same place as you might figure. So it's in this particular spot which they have to get to. But another thing in the episode which sort of ties into this stuff is then Eddie is still hiding out, and they've told him to stay where he is. There's this funny thing where he calls Nancy, and rather than it being anything more urgent, like he's getting her to like get him like food because he hasn't been fed in a while, but also he asks her for like a 6-pack of beer, which is pretty funny. And it's sort of funny because you get the impression Nancy's gonna do it as well, but she's like not really a priority at the moment. But things intensify with the Tigers in this episode and that group, because we have Chrissy's funeral, and after the funeral they get together, and once again the douchebag Jason is like stirring shit up and saying these things. But about like the Hellfire Club, about Eddie, how he's responsible, how he's a freak, and all stirring all this stuff up again and saying they have to go after him. But another thing that happens is like Patrick becomes the next victim of Vecna, because he starts seeing images in this episode. So he actually voices some opposition to what Jason is saying. He says, tries to talk them out of going after Eddie, essentially, and says he doesn't think there's any link, and this is like overreacting. But he's shouted down because there's too many. There's too many of them, and Jason obviously has his mind made up. So they go looking for them, and where Eddie's like trying to get through to the others, trying to call, I think it's Dustin, but because they're in this house and searching around, and I think at some point he's put the walkie-talkie down, like rowing, he gets the boat and goes out on the lake. Starts swimming after him, but that's when the demon gets Patrick, and Patrick becomes the next victim. Just the stuff in Russian to talk about now, Russia and Alaska. So I'll say then, if Robin might have had the line of the episode, Murray steals the episode for comedy. His karate shit coming out in full force on that aeroplane was so entertaining. He made it so funny. It's this great beat for him, because he has said about how he's like a black belt, and Joyce encourages him to like use that in this tense situation for them. They're obviously held captive by Lurie, who's a complete arsehole, as me and Rachel said on the last review. So they're on this aeroplane, and Joyce figures out that Lurie can't hear what they're saying, and they manage to get free, or at least Murray does. She's, as I said, she's like encourages him to like use the karate, and it's this really funny scene. This like big character moment where he pops up and he starts threatening Yuri. He does all this cheesy shit, saying about how like his hands are like, it's either his hands or his feet are like the arrows, his feet are spears, all this stuff, and he's going all like actiony. So, and at first Lurie's like not very impressed, he's just laughing at him, and they get into like this very comedic fight where they're on, because Lurie, I'm assuming, has put it on autopilot, and they're going back and forth on this plane. Joyce is like reacting, just sitting there getting all freaked out. And what makes it absolute gold is that at one point Murray gets knocked down, but he bounces back up and he just starts saying the lines again, but says them with even more conviction. And it's sort of like his big action type movie moment where the hero like bounces up again, gets like the second wind, and then ends up kicking the villain's ass, and he just like unloads with like the karate. But it is so entertaining. Murray is so funny in that scene, and then they have to worry like the sort of catches, and then he knocks Lurie out, and they need someone to fly the plane, because Joyce says then I didn't mean for you to knock him out, just to obviously get us free and capture him type thing. We still need him to fly the plane. So then you get this again familiar movie type scene where Murray has to try and figure out how to like land the plane. It's this whole thing as they're dipping down, and once again, this is stuff you've seen in a lot of other, but the way it all plays out is just so much fun. And both me and Rachel have said how we've enjoyed this combination this season. Like, almost as she said, this is something you didn't think we needed, but we really do. They do make a great like odd couple type team. But it's so well directed and so well filmed. The stuff in Russia this season has almost been like the more like entertaining, tense action type stuff of the show. Like, there's one or two other examples, like that scene in the house in California, but generally for high action thrills, it has been the stuff in Russia, because we talked about Hopper's attempted escape at the end. In the last episode, but this stuff where they're like crash landing the plane, and at one point you get the shot of the plane like skimming the trees, which is a really good shot, and they just crash land in dramatic fashion at one point, and they just end up in the snow. So that's another thing that makes the visual so good, because they like just crash into the snow really dramatically. It looks really good and is exciting to watch. So it's a really well directed and fun type scene. So back with Hopper, and him and Enzo have been put in the same cell, which is a little bit convenient, done for drama. It makes sense though, because they were like arrested and caught at the same time, so they're in the same cell. And this is like some of the darker stuff in the episode, because Hopper starts opening up to Enzo, starts talking about the things he has gone through in the past, like with his daughter, losing his daughter. And Hopper at this point is very like dejected, and frustrated and down than he didn't make it out. So I think at this point his spirits are very low, and David Harbour does a great job of getting that across. He's very like sort of down, deadpan, very sort of down, and kind of very moody and like brooding in this scene. But it's one of those where he does a lot with very little, seemingly. But it's an interesting scene, because he does the whole thing about Joyce getting nearer to me actually puts her in more danger, which is a good way to like sell how much he legitimately cares for her, because it's always a big gesture if you can actually say their lives would probably be better without me. The closer they get to me, the more danger they're in. Because obviously he's talking about Joyce are now as part of like his family unit. When they have known each other for a while, because Enzo was kind of his guard on the inside originally. Like emotional stuff with Hopper, but by the end of the episode they're closer again, these two halves. On to chapter 6, which is called The Dive. Actually have to take a dive, that being the Dustin, Steve, etc. group, because they slowly start to figure out where this gate is. They figure out there is another gate. It is in Lover's Lane, and that's where they have to go to get into the Upside Down Vecna. That's where he's located. So they figure out in this episode that there are other gates than in the Upside Down. It's not just the couple, which they become accustomed to. So it becomes more scientific, this episode, and Dustin starts like bringing that, and they start working things out with maps and with his like compass, and we get more into the science and the investigation, which they make so engaging in this show. There's also like the obvious gag Dustin used, because they figure out it's actually at the bottom of this lake in like Lover's Lane. He makes the gag at one point, it literally is a water gate. How about that? That becomes a whole gag. Like the boat on the lake, like Lover's Lane, it's late at night, they've got like flash talks. There's just such something very like old fashioned and exciting about watching this stuff play out with the groups, and just this slow burn sort of like mystery type suspense plot in like figures out the accordions, and they get to this place. But like Nancy, I think it is, says that there's only like room for like 3 on the boat or something. So they're actually quite mean to like Dustin, particularly because it's Dustin, Max and Lucas who get left behind. And there's a bit with Max and Lucas in this episode where Lucas like apologizes if he wasn't like there for Max, and in some ways we've already done this stuff, but I think it's just like an apology type thing because he feels then when they broken up, like he maybe wasn't there enough for Max, and Max is like big enough to admit, no, I was like pushing you away, I could have been more receptive and stuff. So it's just another small moment with them, but it's good to have it anyway. And especially is like later kids don't go to bed too late. Don't wait up for us. He like sneaks on the boat, and Dustin's like, "Hey, I thought you said only 3." He's like, "Sorry." Like Stancy flagging up starts to come back into it because, like, at one point, because Dustin's compass stops working because they're like radioing back and forth between the two locations, and his compass doesn't work, so they can't figure out the spot. So Steve actually decides, I've got to go in. He's without his shirt, it's very clear. There's a Stancy moment where Nancy eyes up a shirt that Steve, and Robin has like a little laugh, like a little look once again, which is great. But Steve puts himself out there. It's very fitting that then he is like the heroic one. He dives into the lake, but then he's in trouble, and what a great Nancy Robin moment, because they decide together we're gonna go in after him. I think it's Nancy first, which is again pushing this angle, and there could be something with her and Steve again, but because Nancy does it, Robin does it, which again feels sort of perfect. And then that leads to Eddie not wanting to be the odd one out, so he dives in as well. And once again, like, as you get further into this season, you're starting to see these visual effects pop up more, and these big visual moments, so you can really see where the budget has been spent. Expansive universe, and these big moments does look really good, this underwater stuff. And when they find the gate, and you just get these creatures coming out of all places, like you get these bats which attack Steve, and that's the whole cliffhanger of the episode, is Steve is put in jeopardy. He obviously volunteers to go in, he puts himself at danger, and you just get like this great direction of the camera swirling round and all these bats coming out of all these places, and you get like this glowing sort of sensation from like the gate and these things coming. It sort of looks all very like post-apocalyptic, but that's the ending. Then Steve is put in jeopardy. He gets attacked by these things. They start swarming around him. They trap him. Like tentacles like wrap around him, and that's the ending of the episode. And he potentially could be killed off, or he's put in danger about that side of the plot, because once again with the stuff with Jake and his group, because they're interviewed by the police over what happened to Patrick, and Jake is full like conspiracy theorist cult leader where he's just driving all this stuff on, and he refuses to accept what's really going on and what happened with Patrick, because once again he's pointing fingers at Eddie, and he's talking about how Eddie has been manipulated, and like a town meeting, and they're trying to control the mood of the town. They're fielding questions, but the parents, who obviously don't have much information, they're getting worried about their kids. So there's part of this which is quite understandable from the parents, but it's the lack of information, and they're obviously getting more like paranoid or worried, at least because of the killings that are happening, and the lack of answers, and that's where this dickhead Jason gets into full like extreme mode, where he's like putting all these ideas in their head, and the actor does a good job. It does capture this sense of like being extreme and out there with your views, but also being this quite captivating sort of presence who's saying all this stuff to like stir things on, where he's almost using what we've seen in this show back really nicely to the scene in that first episode where he was giving that speech at the game type thing, where he was once again using stuff that have happened to the town over the last year, like Hopper and Billy, and it's not like this is more extreme than that this is where things have snowballed, and he's just gotten this stuff in his head and is just being an all-round sort of bigot. But you can see how it stemmed from there and has just gotten more extreme and out of control. So himself and the team, the Tigers, and just promote this idea of this stuff, we're all together, and just using that stuff in quite a cynical sort of way to make himself look good and preach to the town or to the school in that case. And the other characters were looking at them, so it's like, what the hell's going on? What's he talking about? But so you can see this nice little link where it's all come together now, and as things have gone on and you've got these killings, and there just happens to be a link to, maybe because Eddie obviously has been the prime suspect, there's just been that possible link which has driven him on, and he starts riling the crowd up, in the crowd who gets all riled up at some point. Once again, that it's done for drama partly, and it's definitely heightened because one thing they do is it's sort of clear than some of the characters we know, like Karen, for example, are the ones in the crowd who are a bit more level-headed and not totally going for this. But you can, with this being the 80s, you can like sort of believe that these people would maybe get rolled up by this. Ed doesn't cover himself in glory, because at one point they're debating it between the parents and Karen, because they're getting out of hand, they're getting all rolled up by this stuff, and Karen at one point says, our children are not murderers, because like there's a question mark over them and they're linked to Eddie and stuff, and Ted just being a douche is like, well, I don't think at this point we can rule anything out, and it's like, come on Ted, don't be a dick with your life. Fun like caper type stuff in this episode, like with Mike and his group at Susie's house, and to talk her into like helping them out to find this location in Nevada, and she takes a bit of talking into it. I think at one point Mike sort of talks about helping our country out. But the catch is, then Susie's father has taken away her computer privileges just to be a dick, and the reason is because he caught her cheating for Dustin, like fixing his grades on the computer, which it feels like very 1980s sort of thing to do. I'm sure it happens even more nowadays, but just the novelty of computers in the 80s, something about that feels really an 80s thing to do, to cheat to help your boyfriend out on a thing. So that's why he's banned her from using the computer, so they have to get around that problem and cause all these distractions. They start using like other members of the family to distract him. They like set off a fire at one point on the stove. They do the thing with like the daughter, I think it is, who's dressed up as a cowboy or Indian, one of the two, and playing dead causes a distraction. And there's a whole bunch of things they use just to tie him up while they do this thing, and it's pretty good fun. It's not the most amazing thing, but it's a solid enough time. And there's also like this gag where Argyle has a crush on one of like the other people in the house. This girl who has a classic 80s look. She's got like the sort of fork earring type thing. Looks at, I mean, her hair's dark, so she looks a bit like Winona Ryder, but she also, the earrings have that, they're the same earrings than the mother has, like in Beetlejuice, so they might have been referencing those, but she has this whole sort of goth vibe, and I guess in the 80s, appearing goth type thing might have been seen as being a bit out there. It's obviously a lot more normal and accepted now. Argyle and her end up having a bit of a thing, and there's this gag later where they just find them in the van and they've been like smoking weed together, and you hear the Jamaican reggae song again sway to work Susie into the plot, because that's another thing with Erica, because she has a little bit of a cameo in this episode with the stuff at the town hall meeting. Voices up complaints at one point when like Jason starts insulting the D&D club and using stereotype, and in typical Erica fashion she just bounces like that's bullshit. There's nothing like going on with like D&D clubs and that they're just nerds. Erica now has got to the point where she says, hell yeah, I'm a nerd, and she just owns up to it, which is a great point for her to have reached now in the show. So that's a good example of them having all these characters now, and with certain characters just using them a bit more sparingly, just giving them nice little cameos or nice little just smaller scenes here and there. And I think with a character like Erica that definitely works out, even though I disagree with my co-host about her being annoying in season 3, because I thought she rocked in season 3, but at the same time I can see how when you've got so many characters, some of them you do need to use a bit more sparingly. So they've done a good job with that with Erica this season. The L plot, because we get this continue thing with her doing the test back to the stuff in the 70s, the flashbacks that we got at the start of this season, and we actually like see an explanation for why she lost control of her powers and why she killed these other kids, and it's because they were ganging up on her, that they went after her, they isolated her. And this stuff is quite hard to watch, because once again we do sort of have to suffer, we do have to sit through that them put just people ganging up on Al and like bullying them, and they threaten to kill her at one point because they get out of their cells and or their rooms, and there's obviously a bit of mystery how that happened. But as I said, they gang up on her because during the tests as well, they also sort of mock her and are aggressive towards her. But they've obviously decided she's this outsider in the group and she doesn't belong. At one point she says, if you tell Papa about this, then we will kill you. But that's when she has the flashback of like killing them in the past. Russia, there's some good stuff in Russia in this episode, and some good, I think, character stuff with Hopper, with him and the other prisoners meet, and the other prisoners are enjoying it, but he's not so much. He's sitting there on the sideline and like, come on, why don't you dig in? It's telling them this story, perhaps, then they're gonna feed him to this monster. Got one of the mind flayers there, which is the one we saw at the end of season 3, and he can hear it across the way, so he's figured out what's going on. So when they're all feeding them, he's like, they're doing it so that we've got like vitality, so that we've got like energy in us. So when he eats us, story about the upside down and the monsters in Hawkins, and this stuff I really like, actually. It's a good sort of reflection and look back over the stuff in the show and what Hopper has been through, and it makes a lot of sense than in the state he's in right now, where he has sort of hit rock bottom, that then he would use that and start telling them stories and start telling them this is what's going to happen, and it's going to be pretty grim. I think at this point he's lost hope to Enzo at one point, because they get into a fight and he's like engineered this so that he can talk to Enzo privately, because he has an idea about using the fire, using a torch to like kill this thing, because that's obviously something they've used in the past. Joyce, we only get a little bit, her and Murray, and I think the best thing about that stuff is we were talking, me and Rachel, about how Yuri is such an arsehole, such a turncoat, then he just had to have his moment when come up, and this is sort of it really, because they've tied him up. He's laughing because he thinks he's got the upper hand, because he's thinking they're in a position where they have to give him money, like like a big part of the ransom money, to convince him to help them. But they actually realise, no, we're in the good position here because we've got you tied up, and because he's using the whole thing, you won't kill me, that's not in your nature, and this is where Joyce has a good line, because she's like, we don't have to, all we have to do is walk away and leave you in harm's way, because there's nothing for miles except, and they start going through like creatures like bears sort of thing, and Joyce being quite malevolent and cackling and stuff like that is really entertaining. And once again we see this double team, this pair of like Joyce and Murray be so entertaining, so good together, the way they work together and hatch this thing where they do turn the tables on Murray, and he's kind of shitting his pants by the end of the scene. That's what it comes down to, where he actually agrees to their deal, like we've seen before, the place that Hopper was at with all the peanut butter. And yeah, he has a map that he shows them where the prison is and how to get there. But that's when Murray has the idea of, because they're obviously expecting Yuri to like deliver them on a silver platter, so Murray has this idea of swapping places and pretending to be Yuri. Now, to be you, I don't look like you, and it's like, don't worry, you don't have to say anything for this role, and they just sort of gag him. But that's good stuff. I enjoyed that stuff. Have a good episode with a very dramatic end and cliffhanger once again. So that's my thoughts on Stranger Things episode 5 and episode 6 of the 4th season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. Share me out on social media, and I will be back soon with the final episode of this half of the season, so episode 7. I'll be back with that review soon. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.